week's Fast Track live show. I've got in the studio Professor Courtney McNamara. Courtney, great to have you join us. I know you're on holiday and you're in a cafe. That is awesome. I'm super excited because we've got some great submissions from members of our community this week. We're going to be going over a methodology chapter, a chapter that every PhD student is likely going to need to write or at least have clarity on. So if you are writing up your PhD, you're not going to want to miss this. We're going to test if a paper is high impact. So Courtney and I, who we've served as editors and peer reviewers of journals, we are going to pretend to be an editor and look if we would send out this paper for peer review and what we would do to improve its chances. Finally, we're going to get to identifying a winning research topic. So if you're just at the beginning of the journey, or even if you're in the middle of it, you want to make sure that you've got a high value topic. Now, we may get some background noise bleeding in from Courtney's side because she's in a cafe. So bear with us, but it's summer and we don't want to miss out on the chance to be with you. So with that, before we dive into it, Courtney, I'm going to flash over to you for this week's quick tip.
Yeah, so this week's top tip actually is coming from my own recent experience rather than my students. And it's a tip that is especially for people who are academics and parents at the same time. And that tip is to avoid the temptation to try and multitask and do childcare and work at the same time. It's pretty near impossible, and I think it just leads to frustration, and you really get much more out of your family life, much more out of your work life if you have a nicely defined boundary there.
Sounds like this might be something you've just been dealing with as you've been on holiday and moving. So how did you do, just out of curiosity, how do you set those boundaries?
Yeah, I mean, knowing it's very, simple and straightforward for me is just setting the times when I'm in work and setting the times when it's family time and not letting them bleed into each other. So it's, sometimes you're sitting with the kids and you think, oh, I'll just check my email on the phone. And then, of course, something comes up in your email and then you're thinking about it while you're with the kids and you're not really there. So, yeah.
Okay. Yep. Sometimes, Courtney, I wish I could just, bottle up your experience and distill it because you're just this fountain of wisdom. But, we actually have done that for you. So if any of you do want to tap into Courtney's wealth of knowledge, right, Fast Track is not just about helping you with the big projects, but also about some of the soft skills around productivity, mindset, managing your relationships with others so that you can really thrive in all areas of your life. If any of you are interested in working with Courtney or I, we've got a few slots left for our Fast Track Inner Circle program. Do get in touch with us with the DMs, join our Facebook group, get in direct contact, and we'll see if you could be a good fit. So with that, I'm going to dive straight into the first thing I want to cover today. We are going to go through methodology chapter writing. And, just before we get into it, when you write a methodology chapter, not every student's going to need to do this, but you're going to need to have a plan for what method you're going to use to try to approach the big questions. I mean, Courtney, for you, what are the big ingredients that you need to have before sitting down to try to write your methodology chapter?
Yeah, well, of course, something we talked about a couple of weeks ago is you need to know what your gap in the literature is, and you need to know what your specific research questions are, and that should lead directly into the types of methods that you're going to use.
Yeah, I like that. Some of you may remember we did a session on writing a winning research proposal. In fact, I've just published, if you watch today, I've just launched a YouTube video on that using our GIFT method. And all those elements, knowing the gap, what your winning idea is to address that gap, proving that it's feasibility, you have a realistic timeline, you need to have all that very clear before you dive in to write your methods. Now, I'm going to open this up. So big thanks to Sharon for being willing to share your work. I know it's always hard to put yourself out there in front of everybody, but I know you've been working really hard, and just appreciate that because we're about open access and want everybody to benefit from our knowledge. I'm going to zoom in so everybody can see this. So we're going to look at Sharon's early days draft of the method chapter, and I think, Courtney, what you've just said, let's see if Sharon has really done a nice job in here of setting out what the gap is first. So can you see this clearly on your side, Courtney?
It's a little bit small for me, but I'm just going to lean in a bit.
Okay. Let me see if I have a way. I'm just going to zoom in. Does this help?
That's better. Yeah.
Okay. I can also increase the font size, which might make a difference. But yeah. Okay. So first paragraph is kind of setting the context, as we can see here. And I'm just going to skip through one of the methods we also espouse is skip test. You should have very strong topic sentences to set up the issue so that each paragraph makes one point. So, educational experiences and adolescent identity intersect. And let's keep going. I'm just going to get to the gap. And this looks like the gap method. So there's a growing body of research that examines autistic adolescents within educational settings. However, it focuses on educational experiences in terms of challenges, positive next steps, or interventions. Okay. Little work has considered how autistic identity might be shaped, and more research is needed to explore here. So, and their personal stories missing. Yeah. So this is the gap. What do you think about this gap, Courtney?
Yeah, so far I like the way that it's signposted. So, this is the traditional way that we outline the gap, that there's this research that does this. However, um, there are these other things that are missing, and that's what this research is going to fill. So it's made it very easy for the reader to identify precisely what the gap is.
Yeah, I like this a lot. And you can see the next paragraph is going to transition. This research seeks to address this gap. So saying that this is what's missing, this is where I'm going to pick up and try to plug these gaps. Just a few things that jump out to me. I'd like to say, have some citations here to show there's this growing body of recent research. And I'd like to say a little bit about maybe what this research has done, what it's demonstrated for us. Because it's saying there's things that's missing in the research. I'd also like to see maybe there's some debate. Maybe they're saying, well, and this research has shown that certain types of education or settings have been better than others, or maybe that it's found that the identity or treating autistic adolescents is just not addressed enough. I'd like to know a little bit about where this body of knowledge is, so I can understand the value of what your contribution is going to be. But I think this has done a nice job setting out the limitations here. So that's really nice. Other thoughts, Courtney? I thought this was really good because this really foreshadows that I think Sharon's going to go and do interviews to actually listen to the stories and hear the voices of adolescent girls who have autism in school. So I like that a lot.
Yeah. If I was being critical, one thing I might say is that at the end, it seems like the primary gap is identified in that there hasn't been any work that seeks to explore how autistic identity is shaped by educational settings. So that seems this big
Yeah.
gap. And then
Yeah.
it's more
This is the big
research is needed to explore autistic girls. So already we've narrowed down to girls a little bit. So I think maybe we could, it's not clear why we should focus specifically on girls, I think.
Yeah. Yeah.
You could just say, I
That's a
think
good
more
question.
research is specifically needed to explore autistic girls, but I think it'd be better if there's a bit of a reason why we should be narrowing it down.
Yeah. So you can do this in the gap. So here's a gap here saying this is focused on positives, but little work has considered how it might be shaped by educational settings. That's good. I think your point is nice. I think it would be nice to maybe take another paragraph to breathe and say, another limitation of this literature is that the focus has maybe been on boys, but not on girls, who may be different for the following reasons. And I think that might be a nice transition. And your gap can occupy too. Another limitation of past research has been I'm just making this up, tendency to focus on boys. However, girls during adolescence face a number of specific challenges. Something to that effect, though, I think could also bring in the second gap and kind of complete the picture. What do you think about that, Courtney?
Yep, that sounds good, because I think there's even maybe a third gap underneath about the voices and personal stories. So we might even
Yeah.
need to open
Yeah,
it
so
up a little
this
bit
is
more.
this is kind of a methodological gap, and say additionally the research has tended to do interviews of maybe teachers and parents, but they haven't asked the girls themselves. So so I think it's a very good point. So one of the things that I often see with students is they have all this great content, and sometimes it gets smushed together, and you just sometimes need to unpack it and give it a little bit of room to breathe. And so I would say this too, that additionally much past research has interviewed um, parents and teachers. Now, I don't know if this is actually the case, but it would be nice to have that kind of site to say, well, this is what past work has done, and what's missing is this. So maybe add that site here. And I think that's what this Harrington and Parsons site is. The only other thing I can think of on the gap is it's nice if you can really quote. I like this kind of adding some sizzle. If you can quote them directly, if they have a quote in their paper saying we need this, that really helps justify that that's a big gap that others need to focus on. By the way, we just gonna bring on the screen, going backtracking for a second. Somebody just echoing your point here. It was very hard for me to accomplish my thesis with my 2 kids and the job. We hear that so much, and that's why you have to be super productive. And if you haven't already, see the fantastic session we have with Courtney, sharing all of her best tips on how she's managed to publish 6 papers a year and keep very happy relationships and happy children. Yeah, not gonna want to miss it. Okay, so but I like this a lot. And Sharon, if you're watching us, I think you've done really well. So let's go from the gap to the idea. Okay. Yep. And then research questions. So go right into research questions. How does an English and I'd like to specify educational experience because we're talking about adolescent years of life. I think we're dealing with secondary schools in this case. So I think that would be nice to say. And the other thing I think that would be interesting to say, we might have missed this a little bit in the gap. There might be part of the gap here on maybe a lot of the studies. I mean, I you may sometimes you may not feel the need to justify it, but you say here, how does an English educational experience intersect? Is there something different about English schools from the rest of the world? Is there why is your focus on England? And if you can add that, I think that would also be a nice ingredient because that's clearly a part of your research question, research scope. And here we go. You're narrowing down to English secondary education system. Okay, what do you think about these research questions, Courtney?
Yeah, so we may take a look. So I think I would, just in very broad terms, I would at least distinguish between a sort of main research question and
Yeah,
it looks like secondary questions. So you
I
can
like
say the
that.
primary research question of this research is this.
Yep, and then exactly. And I think this is kind of I think this is meant to be the broad one. And then as a second order question here, we're gonna try to identify the key issues. And I try to stay away from jargon here at the beginning, individuation of identity if possible. But as long as your
Yeah.
supervisors and readers know. But in general, I like to make writing accessible to as many people as possible. So try to avoid the jargon in your research questions if you can. But I do like this. This was a little unclear. So when you have something intersect, two or multiple things are coming together, it's not clear what's intersecting here. I mean, I almost think you don't need that to say how does an English educational experience affect female autistic identity during adolescent years of life.
Yeah. I think a good strategy here is you could just look at what you framed as a gap and try and repurpose it into a question.
Oh, okay. Say a bit more about that, Courtney.
The idea is just to use the same language that you used above and outlining your gap to also structure your question so that it's very clear to your reader, like, okay, yeah, this was a gap. Oh, and it makes sense. Now, like, this is
Yep.
the
So
question.
little work has considered how autistic identity might be shaped by educational settings. So we're how do educational settings shape autistic identity? Do you mean like that?
Yep. Yep,
Female
exactly.
yeah. So I like that a lot. I think only other thing that comes to mind for background. Sometimes in the methods, you might need some background so everybody can take part in the conversation. And this is the methods chapter. So you've probably covered it, but somewhere you're probably going to want to cover some background on how identity, what things shape people's identity and influence it during these formative years. Not saying that's probably not doesn't need to be here, but you got this a little bit and saying that here somewhere that it's going to want that. So I like this research questions. Okay, now the next thing that you've got is your winning idea to address this gap. And Chuck Wu, I'm glad that you like what we've got here. Do ask any questions. If anything is not clear, it means that Courtney and I are not doing our jobs. So okay, so now clarity on the gap. What about this part? How do you feel about this plugging the gap?
Yep. I wouldn't, this is very minor, but I just wouldn't frame it in terms of a proposal. Like I propose to address this gap. It'd be more something along the lines of this thesis
Yeah, exactly. We're past the proposal stage,
Yeah.
so now we're actually doing it. This thesis will address these research questions through, uh, two main areas of study. Is how she set it up, so that's good. So one here is systematic review to identify existing literature. So I like to say a little bit why though. Is I want to understand how this is going to address these gaps.
Yeah, in a sense, it's a bit puzzling because you said there isn't any literature, and now you're saying you want to find the literature. So,
Exactly,
yeah,
exactly. So a systematic review of how educational experiences shape identity in autistic adolescent girls. Of international research. So that works. It's a little bit clearer. So this is linking it back to the research question, and then the qualitative study. I think the key thing here is what Sharon mentioned before is the voices and personal stories. So these, I think, the qualitative study to understand the lived experiences of adolescent girls in English secondary education, adolescent girls with autism, um, and their uh, voice and yeah, so kind of see the English system through their eyes
yeah,
and their voices of potential issues and challenges as they seek to develop their identity. Something like this. I'm not sure this is quite right. Sometimes Courtney, right? Things are maybe not. We cover a lot of expertise, but even if things are not in our expertise, we know what needs to be there. And
yeah,
so, Sharon, you're going to have more expertise to say this and engage with this debate. But I think you want to not just say a qualitative study, but say why and what's that going to do to fulfill these questions that you have. So, yeah, any thoughts on that? But I thought this was very nice.
yep, that looks good.
Okay, and then so now chapter overview. So what's going to happen now is this kind of straightforward walk through the methods, and I like that Sharon has some signposting. And I know Sharon, some parts are incomplete. You just dropped it in here, totally okay. And now she's going to go through the systematic review part and go through the search strategy and methods. I don't think we need to look at this too much, but this is looking very good, just on quick brush. And I think the rest just follows. So these are all the tools, and in a way, Sharon, I know you've made a lot of progress on your systematic review. You can just drop those into the methods chapter right here. So this is, I think, is a good stopping point on the methods chapter. If you're going to have a methods chapter, now some of you have theses that will be more kind of just contained chapters that have each chapter has its own set of methods written inside the chapter. That's going to vary a bit by your field, but you do need this kind of overall overview for yourself of your thesis of what are my big thesis questions, what are the big gaps, and how are my chapters, what methods am I going to use to address those gaps, whether you're doing the style of having a distinctive methods chapter or those methods are in each chapter. I hope that made sense, Courtney. Let's take a couple questions because I think we got some really good ones. And yeah, here's a good question. Do you also help with molecular biology type of research or qualitative only? No, we've got students in. I'm thinking of Maria Anna. We've got students in genetics. We've got students in epidemiology, qualitative researchers across the board. And that's because the principles of good research across fields are very, very similar. The things that you need to do to get these big projects done and have clarity and direction and not go in circles are the same. And we created this program to help people avoid some of the most common pitfalls that causes them to lose time and feel frustrated. What would you say? What would you say, Courtney?
Yeah, we definitely have students from all sorts of disciplines that attend our sessions and find them useful. Yeah.
Yeah. I personally, I think it's really a lot of fun because it often gives rise to that kind of cross-disciplinary creativity. It's not often you get biologists with business, with engineering, with clinical medicine, all in the same group working on research together.
Yeah.
Um, so, okay, hang on. We got another one here. Research questions and objectives are always the same thing, so writing them at the same time is repetition. Most of the format insists you adhere to writing both. So I don't think we've said objectives and research questions here. So this one doesn't have a study objective in it. But just to this point, I think it is really important to be linear. And some universities have a structure that they ask their students to do that does create some repetition, which can be kind of annoying. The main thing I think that you really need to focus on here is just that you have clarity about the gap and the research question, and then your method to align it. And that's the next question I want to cover. But yeah, any thoughts on this one, Courtney?
Yeah, I think what you said, you just need to make sure that there's a direct relationship between your gap and then what your study is going to do.
Yeah. And don't worry too much if there's some if your university asks you for both of these things, and you have a little bit of redundancy, that's totally okay. You can strip it out later. Sometimes, especially when they're asking you for a methods chapter, they just want to check that you're making progress and you can get this done and you have a realistic plan at this stage. Because universities also have a vested interest. Sometimes their funding is linked to how many students get to completion, and so they really want to help you get ahead. Okay, please could you elaborate how to align research gaps objectives to the research questions? Pass that to you, Courtney.
Yeah, I think we talked about this a bit. And one good strategy is, again, to use the same language that you've used in identifying your gap to frame your research questions. Just turn around the gap and turn it into a question. So if little research has done this, then this study is going to investigate that.
Yep, exactly. This is exactly what we're talking about here. Each of these limitations can turn into a research question. So you kind of have a straight line from gap to question. I like that. Okay, let's move on. I want to go and help Anusha. So Anusha, I'm gonna close out of this for a second and stop sharing this screen. And so let me read to you what Anusha has written to us. So Anusha says, I worked on selecting the winning topic for the systematic review. I tried to link different aspects and try different specifications, but there's already a systematic review on that topic. So she sent us 2 Picos. And if you don't know what a Pico is, then I'm going to copy it in here. She sent a Pico, and this won't go to all channels, but I'm going to just copy this in the chat so some of you should be able to see it. 2 potential Picos. And it appears in both the Picos, she's wanting to focus on Asian populations, and she's interested in outcomes of asthma. And in one, she's wanting to look at the impact of particulate matter, and the other, she's interested in anti-inflammatory diets. So, okay. So I think sticking with asthma as an outcome is really good. I don't know about limiting to the Asian population necessarily. So we'll go back to that. And Adama, I see your question. We'll try to come back to that later. So we'll move on to this one by Anusha. So I think the easiest thing for me to do here is to pull up a whiteboard and we look at this Pico together and see what refinements we can make, and answer and see where a nice gap is to help Anusha really hone in on something that's going to be high value, feasible, and maybe not done before. But Anusha, you did a really nice job already, I can say, by checking to see, what's the closest paper to yours and checking to see if it's been done before. So, good for you. I've had so many bright students start their project and then only get halfway through it and realize somebody's already done it before, and then they get depressed and disappear for a while. So you really did a good job doing that. Okay, so the Pico. So we've got Pico here: population, intervention, comparison, outcome. And outcome, we've got asthma. Could be asthma incidence. Could be lots of different things. Can you see your screen, by the way, Courtney?
Yeah, I can see your screen.
Okay, good. And then the intervention we're going to look at, it was either the anti-inflammatory diet, which I think is kind of interesting. We'll take a look at that. Anti-inflammatory diet, or the other one was particulate matter, air pollution. We just had a student, by the way, Ariri, in our group, get her systematic review on particulate matter during COVID published, which is awesome. And population, maybe Asian population. So just so you guys can see what a Pico is and getting that down. And the comparison is usually the alternative to this, maybe a high inflammatory diet or low pollution settings. So let's go look at and see where the literature is in this area. So I'm going to pull up Firefox and I'm going to go straight to Google Scholar and let's take a look. So, Courtney, if you wanted to look at what's been done and to kind of how would you approach trying to find a winning topic?
Yeah, I mean, I would first to see whether something has been done. I would look for what we call in the program the nearest neighbor. That's so a systematic review on asthma and anti-inflammatory diets.
Let's take a look. Okay. Diet and asthma. And so this is looking pretty good. So, this is interesting because I'm actually not seeing this come up. Now, one of the challenges is on dietary intake. One thing that's already coming out, I'm not seeing a lot on anti-inflammatory diet. So let me get out of the systematic review and see if it might be talked about in a different way. Yeah, I'm not really seeing. Here's a dietary inflammatory index. So that's very interesting. And that was 2015. And look at all these sites. So that's nice. So we might need to see instead of anti-inflammatory diet in our search, we might need to look at diet and inflammation, fatty acids, diet, asthma. So yeah, investigation of dietary intake. So the issue I'm seeing, there's things on Mediterranean diet, but there's not really a whole lot of studies that seem to be coding dietary inflammation. Now, the other thing in dietary inflammation, I know there's a setting on ultra processed foods that are thought to be inflammatory, and this could be in there as well. So that could also be an interesting systematic review. If you think there are certain types of foods that are high inflammation, like these ultra processed foods, this is health outcomes, not asthma. I see space here on this. This looks like a good area to me. What do you think, Courtney?
Yeah, definitely. And I think the idea of the student themselves categorizing what are inflammatory foods, and then looking for different studies, like you said, like ultra processed foods and others, that they can have a nice review of that.
Yeah, so I think you might have found, just looking at the first one in your idea, Anusha. I don't know if you're on with us, but maybe the particulate matter in asthma has probably definitely been done. I'm sure, because that's kind of connecting lungs to asthma, and yeah, so there's tons here. But when we look at the diet one, I think that is a winning idea. I really love it. I'm seeing lots of scope here, and I would encourage you to do it. Yep. So if you're interested, take that forward. We've got a mini course that's 100% free in the Facebook group. You can also find a playlist in YouTube that we put together, taking you step by step from start to finish and actually publishing, submitting to the journal your systematic review. We take you every step of the way. You're not going to find it anywhere else. So that's awesome. I don't know. I'm really excited about this topic, Courtney.
I know. I want to know what happened.
I think this is really good. I mean, it's kind of a plausible story that inflammatory diet could trigger this, maybe at critical periods of life. So,
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's one of the things too. When you've got a good research question, exactly, it's like there's detective work. You want to know what the answer is, what the end of the story is. So, yeah, I really love it. Okay, so let's go to our last one, and I think this is going to be fun because we're going to put our editor hats on, and we're going to look at a submission from Hemin. So I'm just going to pull that one up for a second, and let me read to you what he wrote to us that he's looking for. So he says, good evening, Prof. I want to thank you immensely for the huge global impact you have been making in mentoring students. Please kindly see my attached paper for your assistance. I want you to help me check the flow, novelty, and if it can be published. Okay, so that is going to be a bit of fun because Courtney and I are going to pretend to be editors and reviewers. So, oh wait, I think Anusha's here and saying, I will definitely go with this topic. Thanks a lot. Okay, that's awesome. Really, yeah, really want to encourage you there. So let me share the screen again. And okay, here's what we've got. And start with the title: Traditional Justice System in the Conflict Resolution Process. Probably need a colon here. An assessment of Bolon in Bada Kingdom, Demsa, LGA of Adamawa State. Okay. So, Hammond, already, this is a very narrow area of research. So just in the title, this might be tricky because some editors look at this Bada Kingdom, they maybe don't even know necessarily where this is and why this is important, or why what type of traditional justice system this is. So you really, one thing to say, when you're doing research on populations that are unfortunately not mainstream populations, to get in the highest of the high impact journals, unfortunately they still are Western centric. You need to describe and kind of make a case for why is this important to that audience, and that already starts with the title. um, to understand why this is a fascinating case study. So you almost have to overcompensate to show the editors that this is relevant to them in some way. What do you think about that, Courtney?
Yeah, definitely. You know, I think in the title, David, you often have the helpful suggestion here of putting a question into the title. So if you could put a question in and or or sort of frame it as a case study for an important question in the overall broader literature, I think that would be a way to go.
Yeah,
That's going to catch the editor's attention.
yeah, exactly. So maybe the question more is, how do traditional justice systems, approach conflict resolution? And then you have this, case study, an assessment. And I don't know if that's necessarily the question, but this is already cluing viewers to say, okay, well, maybe in the West there's this big debate on how we're going to try to resolve conflicts through the judicial system, and maybe now we're going to say, well, what can we learn from these other systems that have been around for ages? And that already is starting to prime the readers that there's going to be some really gold nuggets in here. It's like when people want to go look at what can we learn from the ancient Greeks about democracy, and people love those studies. I think you might want to kind of create that kind of a narrative and story if you want to boost the impact. And the other problem is, Bolin, you'll know what this is, but we don't. So you might have to go overcompensate and clarify. Bolon Justice, maybe that is that the name of the system? We don't know. So we're kind of naive to all this. It's always good when you have a manuscript. It's something we do at FastTrack. We do an internal peer review before papers get sent out. Sometimes when we work in our fields, we just take certain things for granted as knowledge that everybody has. And it's really helpful to get independent reviewers to look at it so we don't have that taken for grantedness when we go to submit. Okay, so if I was going to review this, Courtney, I would do this. So I would look at the title, and then I'm going to skip to the abstract pretty quickly to see what the abstract says. So the Bada's a chiefdom, 18 districts, has been weakened by the destructive impact on relationships. Okay, we don't know why that is. On the other hand, it has been, what is it? That's a little bit vague. The justice system has been in. So this is already confusing. The justice system's had destructive impact, but then it's had a mechanism for conflict resolution. So that's confusing. And is this a judicial system? Here. So this is hard. This is hard. So even in the abstract, so abstract needs to have a few ingredients, and we kind of break apart abstract. So I like to have students write the abstract as background, and then the methods, and to really have clarity, and then put an abstract back together. So it's kind of like we get all the nuts and bolts and the parts, and then we bring it back together so everything's in there and is clear. And then the results. Okay, this is the conclusion. So we can actually see if we break apart this abstract that there are a few things missing. So we have the methods. This is nice. The methods are good, but we don't have anything about the results, and you jump straight to the conclusion. So yeah, I would put this back together, describe what the main findings are, and let's look here. And this background is very long. So the background needs to get to the gap. Identify the gap and big research question. I mean, this is definitely a theme of today. Big gap research question. What is the high value debate that you're tapping into? And really try to justify, why do people abroad, people outside of this state, this is probably very high impact and very important for Adamawa State. I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing that wrong, but to take this to the next level, to be high impact is it's got to impact the world. And that's what we want to help you do. And you just got to explain it, foreground it. What do you think here, Courtney?
Yeah, exactly. I think again in the first sentence you have to walk back a little bit the same way you did in the title. You have to walk back to what the bigger question in the literature is, and like David said, what's the hot topic here?
Yeah. So, like, how could a background be? I'm just going to make something up now. Many settings, many countries suffer from high conflict arising from ethnic fragmentation. I don't know, or social cleavages. Historically, judicial systems, judicial systems have been an important player in either aggravating or alleviating these conflicts, right? So, what's the gap? It is not well understood how traditional justice systems of chiefdoms um, can help mitigate conflicts, something like this. So that's the background. We've set a gap, and now we've got a method. So we did a series of interviews. So just saying qualitative methodology, I'd say we performed a series of interviews to better understand something like this. We did interviews, and now if you frame it like this, that's high impact. That now we've tapped into what is the big debate the world is having. Now this is relevant to the U.S. Now this is relevant to Italy, to Germany. That's interesting, and I think that framing him on for you, that story of let's go find nuggets from these local judicial systems will take this paper, catapult it to the next level. What do you think about that, Courtney?
Yeah, absolutely. And now your study is framed that your case study is part of your methods. That's just a method to get a bigger hot topic.
Yeah. So I would make these tweaks. I'm not going to go through all the paper because now I think these are tweaks to the introduction. Haman, I'd encourage you to get in touch with us. And again, look at our resources of the group about crafting a winning introduction. It's going to cover all the ingredients that your introduction needs to have to really sell. And I say sell because you are selling this paper to the best journal you can get it to. And there's tons of competition to get into those top journals. So take a look at that. You're going to get a ton of value out of that. Let's take any questions if we've got any from people in the group. We got a thumbs up, so nice to see. Hopefully this is all making sense. Okay. Gonna give people a couple seconds just to see if there's anything else. But look, again, I just want to echo just a huge thanks to all of you who submit and share with us. We're really committed to open access, and I think sometimes when people are struggling, they're scared to ask for help. And one of the biggest things that differentiates grad students who are going to succeed from those who don't is the ones who are struggling don't suffer in silence, but they lean in and they reach out to get support. And it's really hard to do because it triggers imposter syndrome, triggers, oh, they're going to find out about me that I'm not good enough. I don't really deserve to be here. I don't want to show any weakness. But you want to invite that weakness in and realize that that's part of you growing and getting better. I just was training in squash today, and I felt terrible on court because I was playing with a professional player, and it just exposed all my weaknesses on court. And it's very easy to get down, but I realized, that's exactly why I'm doing this. I'm training to get better, and I have to expose those weaknesses to get to a point of strength. We've got a question here. Can you please give us some examples related to science papers? So are you referring to us about the gap? Because what we were just talking about in terms of high impact and tapping into a big debate, same principle for science papers. Same thing for identifying the research questions. So can you, maybe be a little more specific for us in what you mean there? Yeah. So you mean the gap. Okay. So I mean, a similar gap can be, if you watch, we have a really fantastic training on finding the gap. It was live. When did we do that one, Courtney? Just a few weeks back, I think.
Yeah, a month or so.
we talked about different kinds of gaps in your field. You can have methodological gaps, you can have geographic gaps. We went through lots of different kinds. And scientific gaps, that it can be somebody maybe hasn't looked at the role of this particular protein, or hasn't looked at these what mechanisms are at play in this biological system. So again, the gap is, again, just as it sounds. There is something missing. You need to understand what that missingness is in your field. And all research, whatever your field is being done because something's missing. Because if we already knew about it, why would you be doing it? So I hope that makes sense. You need that clarity on what's missing, that missingness in your field.
The formula is the same across the.
Can you please give more information on research gaps and turning such into research questions? Adam, yeah, Courtney, do you want to take this?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's we covered this a bit earlier on. So you outline your research gap. So prior work has done this, but it hasn't done this, and therefore I'm going to do that. And now we need to flip it and turn it into a research question. If prior research hasn't looked at A, B, and C, then how does A, B, and C influence this, whatever your topic is? So it's just taking this very same language that you use to identify your gap and flipping it and turning it into a question, basically. But you want to make sure that the relationship between the two are completely direct and obvious.
Yeah. Exactly. And I think, Heyman, I don't know if this is you here. I think the paper by Heyman is a good topic. But exactly, considering what's happening in Nigeria and African societies, you need to say that. That's the debate. There's all these bad things happening. How can the judicial system help or hurt that conflict resolution process? To answer that, we're going to do a detailed case study. So that is necessary background, because when you cover that, you're bringing in your audience. You're raking them in, saying, hey, you guys are having banditry and kidnapping and all this bad stuff. And we need to know if the law system's aggravating the problem, or how can we better achieve conflict resolution to stop this bad stuff. So yeah, we're kind of zigzagging between questions. What's the fundamental difference between a research gap or a gap based on some project which brings funding? I'm laughing because it's funny because there are lots of research gaps. Some of those research gaps get funded by institutions and some don't. Yeah, Courtney, I'm gonna pass this on to you as well.
Yeah, so I mean, they're both research gaps. So one gap has been submitted in a proposal to a funding agency and has been funded. I mean, funding agencies have particular objectives that they're trying to meet, so they'll be funding particular types of gaps. But the fundamental difference between both of them is that one is funded and one is not.
Yep. So somebody thinks that gap has high importance. It has high importance to them, or their mission statement. So, for example, if you look at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, if you look at their priority statement, they say their missions are guided by the passions of Bill and Melinda Gates. So, if they fund it, it's because they think it's important. And that's why it got funded. Doesn't mean it's necessarily a better research gap, but it fits with their mission and what they're interested in funding and supporting. So, yeah, I think for you, always, I would try to, at least at the stage you're at now, try to identify a really high impact gap in your field. I mean, there are many different gaps. Ideally, your gap would be like, not just like a little tiny crevice. Yours would be like a huge, like a hole. Like there's a big, where like there was an earthquake and there's you can't reach one side to the other, and that you want to bridge that gap, if that makes sense. So some gaps are important, more important than others. Okay. Guys, look, really good participation today from everybody in the community. Really great to have you. Thanks again for all these submissions. Again, if some of you are interested in working with Courtney and I more closely and the powerful community of students helping each other, do get in touch. We'd love to hear from you, and we'll see if you could be a good fit. And with that, Courtney, I think we can leave you back to the cafe and the family, and we'll be back same place, same time on Friday. So do email us, send us. We're at Courtney McNamara at FastTrackGrad.com. I'm at David Stuckler at FastTrackGrad.com. And I know we haven't gotten to all the questions, so if we hadn't, just send us a DM, and Courtney and I always go back over to make sure. So, yep. Hey, have a great weekend, everybody, and we will see you next week.